There was a lot of abuse. There was alcohol. There was neglect, emotional, mental, physical, and sexual abuse. It started when I was 5, and I'm talking about the sexual abuse. That's where I was at when I first tried to commit suicide when I was 9. I look back on all that. I'm grateful for the journey I've walked because it's brought me to the place where I'm at today. The Lord has been so
Got it. All right, so we'll start from the top. So, can you introduce yourself for me?
My name is Pam. I've been coming to River Oak since right before COVID. I came from Arkansas, and I ended up in Virginia because of the Navy. Retired in 2007.
So, tell me about your childhood.
Hoo-wee. My parents got a divorce when I was 2, so I lived part-time with my mom, part-time with my dad, and I want to say something before I start talking about this. Both of my parents are living, and it's very, very important for me to honor them, and I need for anyone who listens to this to understand. You know, we are all a product of whatever we grew up in. We don't know how to answer and respond to things. And that's what, with my parents, a lot of it with my parents. They were not equipped to deal with the situations or, in their own stuff, I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say. Because, but my parents, my dad was not involved. Fishing and hunting was his thing. So when I was living with him, my stepmother usually had the ball, but we were in church every Sunday, every time the doors were open. When I lived with my mother, however, we didn't, she would put us on the bus sometime and have us go to the church. So I was always exposed to the gospel, but didn't know the gospel, didn't have head and heart knowledge of the gospel. But anyway, living with my mother was very, very difficult. There was a lot of abuse. There was alcohol. There was neglect, emotional, mental, physical, and sexual abuse. But when I moved in with my dad when I was 14, he found out what had been going on when I lived with my mother. And that had been the longest period I'd lived, because I lived with her from the time I was 9 to I was 14 during that time frame. And that's when most of the abuse happened.
Between those years?
Well, it started when I was 5, but when I went back when I was 9, it started back up. And so when I moved in with my dad, and my stepmother, after church one night, we came in from church and, we went to bed, and my parents, they came and got me out of bed, and they were like, Pam, we need to ask you something. And they asked me about it, and I told them, said, yeah. And my dad looked at my stepmother was sitting on that end of the couch. My dad was over in the recliner, and I'm over on this end of the couch. And they just both looked at me. And my dad, I remember my dad sitting in the recliner with his feet crossed. He didn't have any socks on. He's just sitting there. And he just says, well, take it to the Lord and let the Lord handle it. And that was the last we discussed it. I was never allowed to talk about it. It was real hard for me. No, I didn't know what it meant to be a part of a family. I didn't know what I had learned about love was ugly. I mean, it was just ugly. It was hurtful. It sucked you dry, It was tough.
So the abuse, was it coming directly from your mom or boyfriends or?
It started when I was 5. It was by somebody different. That was one person. Then it was by 2 different people when it started, when I came back when I was 9. But they knew. They knew what was going on. There's no, and I'm talking about the sexual abuse. I was sitting on the bed. My stepdad had a ham radio station, a radio. He did ham radios. And when you walk in the bedroom, the bed was right here, and over in the far corner was his desk. But his desk faced that wall. But he had a chair that he could spin around, and see the door in the bed. His buddy, Yankee Dime, came over, and he was a ham operator. Frank is sitting in his chair. Yankee Dime sits on the bed, and he picks me up and he puts me in his lap. And he starts inappropriately touching me. My stepfather's sitting right there. Yankee Dime's wife has 5 kids. They had 5 kids. They had just had their 5th baby, brand new baby. And I'm sitting there going, what is going on? I'm like 8 or 9 years old. I think I was 9. He asked my mom, he said, can she come home with me and help his wife with the new baby? I was 9 years old and knew that didn't make sense. And she sent me home with him. And he sent his family to bed. And I was supposed to be sleeping on the couch in the living room, and in the far right-hand corner there was a Christmas tree. And I just remember watching that Christmas tree. And for years, and even to this day, I still have a hard time with Christmas because that and another incident that happened at Christmas. And then my stepfather, Frank, he was the other one. But my mom knew. So my concept of love, my concept of who God was, I had a toolbox that was completely and utterly empty except for a bunch of junk, a bunch of lies. It is so true. I mean, we're born, God gives us that knowledge of Him on our heart. His thumbprint is on our heart, and we're born into a world that the enemy just tries to wash that thumbprint away. And if you're not raised in a church, let me rephrase that. If you are not raised by a family of God, if you are not raised by people who are showing you the love of God, that print just gets covered up by their brokenness. And, it just becomes buried. And then you're left with the empty toolbox full of, a toolbox full of gunk to try to figure this world out. And that's where I was at.
It kind of leads me to what you said when you were 9 and you attempted suicide.
Yeah, that was the first time.
It honestly breaks my heart to hear, in hopes that maybe somebody who's going through something similar can hear a message of hope. Like, what is going through your mind as that 9-year-old?
I was tired.
To make that decision.
I was tired. I was. I have a cousin. She told me one time she didn't go through the same thing, but she went through something else, and we were talking about God and everything, and she told me when she was a little girl, her experiences were different, but when she was a little girl, she knew Jesus existed. She said she just knew. He saw her, and she would just talk to him all the time. And I used to, when she shared that with me, I was just like, well, why didn't I know? Why wasn't he there with me? That's where I was at when I first tried to commit suicide when I was 9. I didn't know. I the Lord shows himself to us in the way he needs to show us, the way he knows we're going to perceive him. I didn't see it at that time. I see it now, things the way he showed himself during that time, because that day that I tried to commit suicide, my little brother found me, and I had tried to hang myself. And I had already passed out, and my little brother, he saved my life that day. And, I just didn't have any hope. I mean, I was like, well, why am I here? What is my purpose? I had one purpose in this world. And you can read between the lines on what that was. That had been my purpose, all that I knew. Anything, I was not to be seen or heard. I did what I thought, what I felt, none of that mattered. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have, but I understand what I'm telling you. There are so many, many, many people who have the same story, and all they want is somebody to see them and to hear them and walk alongside them. Oh, that's one thing I'm so grateful about regeneration that's coming, that's going to be starting here. I think about, I'm in the middle of that, and I just think about that, and I'm like, oh my goodness, if that had existed when I was a little girl, would I walk the walk I walked,
Yeah. So now as you move into your teenage years, is he pursuing you at all in these years, or is this?
No, I don't. When I moved back in with my dad when I was 14, like I said, I was always at the church whenever the door, opened. Now I did not believe I had the right to say no. I did not, but what happened was, and I didn't know this until much, much later in my life. But at the time, when I was about 14, I went to church camp, and I thought I had committed, I had surrendered my life to the Lord. But what I really had done was I used the Lord. I used the teachings of saying, no, be pure, I used that as an excuse. I had an excuse to say no. I had an excuse to, I didn't have a right, but I had an excuse, if that makes sense. And so I was like, yeah, so that was very comforting for me. During that time frame, I needed somebody just to hold me and show me that I was loved without taking anything from me. When my mother was called into the school and confronted about the abuse, she came home and she looked me in the face and she pointed her finger and she said, "You better not be lying to me, Pamela Kay." She never reached out and put her arms around me and held me and said, "It's going to be okay, I'm here for you." My dad never put his arms around me and said, "You know what, Pam, I'm sorry you went through this. I'm here for you. Let me walk with you. I don't know how we're going to do this, but we'll get through it together." That never happened. I don't think she believed me, because it interfered with her life,
So she was unaware, even though it was like she sent you to the man's house, like she was unaware of what was actually happening?
No, she knew. She had to have known. Yeah. It was just she did not want to know because it affected her life if she faced it.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
It does. So you're in the teen years here.
Mm-hmm.
You've gone to this camp. You've accepted the Lord, but you're not walking it out.
Well, it was definitely a crutch.
Yeah.
It was definitely a crutch because I was involved in the youth group and I was involved, but there was not. There is a difference in my relationship with the Lord now than that I know that I didn't know Him then. Mm-hmm. I didn't have heart knowledge of Him. And I don't think I didn't believe He loved me, Like I said, his word was a crutch for me to say no. It was an excuse for me to, to protect myself until I went off to college.
So throughout those remaining teen years, like you mentioned things like multiple suicide attempts.
Yeah.
You mentioned self-harm.
Yeah.
Like, take me to that child who's doing these things
But
why.
a lot of that started when I went to college.
Okay. So we'll
So I I tried to commit suicide several times when I was younger, and then when I went off to college, um, um, my first week in college, I started drinking and I started smoking pot and I started just, I just went and did, phew, I just, and I was looking to fill that void, 'cause I had a roommate. She took me out that first Friday to a party and it was on, it was, and I started, I that was definitely and I look back now, and that is definitely a sign that I did not have a relationship with the Lord, at that time, because the first opportunity I had to make my own decisions, and I didn't have somebody else trying to control my words and my thoughts, and I just went, shoop, I went off the deep end.
At what age did the abuse stop and you just.
The sexual abuse stopped when I was 14.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you were still dealing with that mentally.
Yeah.
And you got that freedom in college, and it was kind of like, it was like maybe a little bit of an escape.
It was, yeah. Yeah, it was, I mean, like I said, it was, I look back on that now and I was looking to fill that void that was in my life. I was looking for something to say, hey, look, you're worthy of being loved. You're valuable. You have value in this world. I was looking for somebody to tell me that, you know, and to say, hey, look, I enjoy your company. I want to spend time with you. You're a neat person. You got your, I just wanted somebody to look at me and say, you are worth more than what you've been told you're worth, and I looked for it everywhere, and looked for it in alcohol. I looked for it in drugs. I looked at, promiscuity. And, that just made things worse because the more it got to the point where I would have to actually be drunk because I thought that's what my purpose was. So I would get drunk thinking I had to do this in order to have somebody love me. And I ended up just feeling worse and worse about myself. And it just, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to myself talk, and it's like, these are all excuses for, but I mean, that's kind of what I sound like. I'm making excuses for what my behavior. And there's no excuse for my behavior. There really isn't.
I don't think it's an excuse in you sharing just where you were at that time.
Yeah.
It's just where you were at that time. And you were dealing with trauma and you didn't know how to deal with it.
That's true. I didn't know how to have a clue.
So at what point did you first have like same-sex attraction?
The first time was when I was still in high school, and I knew something was different. There was I saw I didn't have a physical. And there wasn't anybody else involved. What happened was we had HBO, and I had seen an ad for a movie that was going to be coming on HBO, and the second I saw it, I went, it's like something in me just, and that was one of the other things that caused me to run more and try to pursue guys more and to be more promiscuous because I was trying to get rid of that feeling that I had felt. And so, and I was maybe 15, 16 years old then. When I went to college, there was two girls in the dorm that I was in, and I knew they were gay, and I just wanted to be around them, you know. But then when I was in I was an RA in the dorm, and um, I met somebody, and we started talking, and we both were like, okay, let's see. And we proceeded to, we knew that there was a certain condition we had to be in for this to happen. So we proceeded to, and the next morning I was like, what do I do now? You know, um, that's when I became, well, I was, I was, I had always been suicidal, but that's when I was like, yeah,
Mm.
I, you know, but that's, I was just like, okay, this is what it means to care about somebody, you know, because I didn't, you know, it, 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 it was a lie, you know. I mean, I look back on it now and I know it was all a lie. You know, it was all just, I believed it, you know. Man, I believed it. I believed that's who I was because I was getting something out of it that I was missing in my life. I was getting acceptance. I was getting what I thought was love because I really didn't understand what love was. It was all a lie. But boy, I believed in it. And I lived it. For 35 years, I lived it. But what was really, I look back on it now and, 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 and in all of that, you asked me earlier if the Lord was chasing me. The Lord didn't, the Lord, I don't think, the Lord let himself be known to me. He let himself, first time he let himself be known to me. I didn't realize it then, but, I look back on it now and I know it is. It was when I was 14 and I walked out the back door of the house we were living in Austin. Excuse me. I walked out the back door that day. I had no intentions of coming back. And I was going to walk off in the mountains and I didn't care what happened. I mean, I just had no care. And I get out there and I hear the leaves underneath my feet and the squirrels running around in the woods, and I hear a stream in the background, and I follow the stream down. I get to I hear water and I follow it, and I see it come up on this stream, and the water was so clear. I mean, it was just, you could see the rock bottom, it was rock and sand. And I reached down, knelt down, reached down, picked up a handful of rocks and sand, and I just sit there, and that water was so cold. I sit there and watch that sand, the water just filter that sand through my fingers. And in that moment, I fell in love with nature. And I believe the Lord gave me that love for nature, because it gave me, because I went back home. I mean, I had I had a little bit of joy in my life. And I look back on that and I think that was the Lord, And I also think the Lord kept me ignorant to a lot of things when I was growing up. I actually, I think he protected my mind from the effects of the abuse, until I got much older.
This is a big one, though. This was like a powerful thing when I read this. You said You mentioned praying for God to take certain desires away.
Mm-hmm.
What did those prayers look like?
The one, the one time that probably the hardest one, I had just left Iceland and came back stateside, and I checked into I was stationed at Jacksonville, Florida, and I checked into the barracks, and I was in a 2-man room, and I didn't have a roommate, and I was just like, and I got on my hands and knees right beside my bed that day, and I said, Lord, if you do not want me, if this is not what I'm supposed to be, then you need to remove all. You don't put anybody in front of me. Don't don't bring anybody across my path. Because I can't do this. Because if this is not who you want me to be, then this is what you need to do. 30 minutes later, this girl checked into my room, and I knew the second she walked in. Oh my goodness, I was mad at the Lord. I was so mad at him. I was like, seriously? And I was done with him. I said, I told you I thought he pursued me. He never let me rest in that lifestyle. There's always a battle going on. There's always saying, that's not right. Yes, and I'm like, but then on the other side, it was like, yeah, yes, and so there was always that back and forth, that tussle. And when Jen checked in that room that day, and 30 minutes later, I was just like, you know what? I'm done with you. Because, and what is so crazy about that is I look at that now, and that wasn't the first time that I did that. I mean, I sit in the living room with my aunt and uncle in Arkansas, and I cried like I'd never cried in my life. Just asking, why was God doing this to me? Why was he doing this to me? If this is not who I'm supposed to be, then why am I this way? And but when I came to know the Lord, what I realized was all those times I prayed for him to take certain things from me, he didn't take them from me because I never gave them to him. I never said, I'd get down on my hands and knees and I wouldn't leave it at the cross. I wouldn't leave it at his feet. I'd get up, I'd dust my feet off, and I'd just be like, okay, you take care of it now. It's not mine to deal with. It goes back to when, I was a kid and my dad said, take it to God, let God handle it. That's not the way it works. You do take it to God, but you have to surrender it. And God never intended for us to walk it alone. Yes, when I was a kid, when I take it to God and God's, yes, but I should have never had to walk it alone. And when I went to the Lord and knelt down and said, "Take this from me," I never surrendered it to the Lord. And that was the difference. When I came to know the Lord, oh man, I didn't care what I was leaving behind. I didn't care at all. I remember, I'll have to do this, and I have to do this. If I'm going to follow Christ, I'm going to have to quit drinking. I'm going to have to stop smoking weed. I'm going to have to, my Sundays are the days that I like to, relax and spend with my family, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. When I came to the Lord, I was like, I don't care. I did not care what I had to leave behind. And I lost everything. The woman I had been living with for 28 years, I lost it. But I gained everything, I gained everything. It was a woman that I had met through ancestry research. I do a lot of ancestry research, and I'd gotten pretty good at doing DNA research, I found my mother's biological father, and I helped this other girl find her biological father. And this one woman reached out to me, and she said, "Hey, can you help me find my dad? Yeah, identify my bio dad." So we started researching, and through the time, I eventually told her that I was a lesbian. And I had already knew she was Christian, and because she let me know that right up front, And she said, well, I'm not going to beat you over the head with what Scripture has to say about it, because I'm pretty sure you already know. But I do want you to know that God loves you, and He has a purpose and a plan for your life. And I love you. And I'm here to talk about it if you ever want to talk about it. Now, where'd you think my dad was at? That went right back to it. And I was just like, I was like gobsmacked. I was like, what just happened here? I had never in my life had anybody just talk to me that way. I had people tell me that I was an abomination, pointing out somebody's specific sin and said, instead of saying, do you know who Jesus is? Do you know that there's somebody who loves you beyond what you can imagine? And He can fill that void that you spent your whole life trying to fill.
Tell me about when your dad found out. Like, how old were you? And you said that he was very unhappy about it.
24. I was 24.
What happened?
I lived in a really small town, and I'm sure somebody told him. Somebody said to him. But it was January the 6th, 1986. And they called me. I lived in a little town over called Camden, and they had called me and they said, you need to come home. And so on Sundays, when I went home on that weekend, I would always meet them at the church and then, whatever. Well, I'm heading to the church, and it was a whole country road, and my dad is coming this way, and I'm going this way, and he goes, and I was like, oops. So I turned around, we went, I followed him to the house. We went in the house, and they just flat out asked me, are you a lesbian? And, I was like, yes. And within the next 45 minutes, I was told to go away. I was not welcome in their home. Don't come back until I get my life right with God. Stay away from my grandmother. Stay away from my sisters. There were some insinuations made that I would do something to my grandmother. I was not allowed to have any contact with any of my family. And so I left that day, completely broken, even a little more. I joined the Navy soon after and began living more lies, But I did well in the Navy. I did real well in the Navy because in the Navy, I lived a lie when I was in the Navy, but I didn't have. I had my professional career. I had something that was stable. I had discipline. I had consistency. There was no love in it, but it was structure that I'd never had before, and I thrived in it, And then I had my secret life, that I lied about. And I always felt guilty, but then I was also angry that I had to lie. Why are you making me lie? Why are, it just always, my life has just been always a big conflict, conflicting one another.
Spiritual warfare. So the woman that you ended up being with for a long period of time, how did that begin?
We were on board the same ship. We were at Persian Gulf. We met there. We were deployed for 6 months during the first Persian Gulf War. Came back. We moved in together, and that's how that. Yeah. Now we lived together for 28 years, but we were really only together for we were together for 23. At the 23-year mark, I had gotten to the point in my life where, I'm in my 30s then, and I could not, I was so uncomfortable in my skin. And I was just so, and, there was a part of me, I got up and I breathed only because God wouldn't take my life. I had quit trying to commit suicide, but there would be days that I'd be going down the road and I'd see the barricade, the big barricade walls, and I would think how easy it would be, how easy, I used to think about that all the time. And, I had a weapon, and how easy it would be. I'd just go in the backyard. That way it wouldn't make a mess. Nobody else could see it. I didn't try. I didn't make any more attempts, but there was always that, because I didn't care about life. And the only reason, in 2004, my dad had, it was Christmas, and my dad had gotten hurt helping the pastor remove a tree. There was a big ice storm in Arkansas, and he got hurt moving a tree off the roof, and that tree came back and clipped him on the leg, shattered his leg, and he had to have rods. My aunt lived right across the street from him. Well, my aunt and them all leave, and when all my relatives other than my parents and my sister found out what happened, my aunt sent a Red Cross message and said, you tell her she needs to come home. So I would go home and visit some of my family. Some of them had open doors, but actually all of them did except for my parents. But anyway, I'm over at my aunt's and I'm smoking a cigarette out on the carpet, and I look at it and I see my dad's house, and I'm like, he can't get up and run. So I walked right over, put my cigarette out, walked right over, knocked on the back door. Barbara answered the door. I walked in, and I just looked at him. He's sitting in his recliner, stretched out, and I know he was drugged up, but I still did it anyway. I said, I just want you to know, I forgive you for not being the dad I needed, and I'm going to ask you to forgive me for not being the daughter that you needed. And that was it. I walked out. And then I don't remember how long after that. And I don't even think that wasn't even 2004. That was before 9/11. So that was before 9/11 that happened. Then after when 9/11 happened, I called him and I said, I just want you to know that I'm not getting sent overseas. I'm stateside. That's the only time I've ever called him. Then in 2004, 2003, I think it was, 2003, 2002, somewhere in there, I met my aunt's house. Now, whenever I went and visited my family, I could never stay, like for Christmas or anything like that. I'd have to leave because they all got together on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve. So I would always have to leave. But I was at my aunt's that day, and on this day, and she came in the living room. She said, Pam, your daddy's on his way over here. And I said, okay, I'll leave. And she goes, no, he's coming to see you. And I was like, what? And so he came over, and we sat there, and we talked for like 3 hours, I don't even remember what the conversation was because I was just like, wow. Anyway, and then in 2004, we had started kind of talking a little bit, not really. But in 2004, he said, Pam, I want you to come home. I want you to take leave and I want you to come home. Now, this is a God story, okay? If you can't tell, I'm kind of high strung. This is a God story. So I scheduled to take 2 weeks leave to go to Smackover and spend with my dad. And man, I'm going to tell you what, I was a nervous wreck. I was just so scared that, I was scared to death of him. I was scared to say something wrong, that, that he was just going to, I was going to get there and he was just going to say, you know what, this ain't going to work, go away. We just can't do this. I was scared to death. Well, I had my first kidney stone and I ended up getting sepsis. And I was sick as a dog. And they gave me 30 days convalescent leave and a whole big old bag full of drugs. And I was like, And I got out of the hospital and I started my drive to Smackover. Even before I got out of the state of Virginia, I had to pull over to the first rest area and go to sleep because I was just not well. So I get there, and my daddy and I spent the next 30 days on the lake fishing. Just me and him. We talked. We cried. He asked me to forgive him. He said he was sorry. And that was the best day of my life, other than when I came to know the Lord.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How old were you at that point?
That was in 2004.
Okay.
So, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, and then when I retired in 2007, he and my stepmom and my niece and nephew, my sister's kids, they came up to there, and then they came up another time, and I'm blessed to have a relationship with him. Blessed.
It's kind of like was this like the first time you felt like forgiveness?
Acceptance. Not forgiveness.
That's a good word.
Not forgiveness, because there was always a part of me still. I had not come to the Lord still.
Yeah.
But it was the first time. But there was always a part of me that was just like waiting for the shoe to drop. Never. But it was the first time. I mean, he. It was. Yeah, it was good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So like from there, and are you still in this long-term relationship during this
Yes.
time?
Yeah. Well, we by this time we were just living together. We weren't in a relationship anymore because I just was not. We still shared everything. We were not. I want to say this, staying PG. We still shared everything except we shared from different rooms. We weren't together. We were together in every other sense, if that makes okay. Yeah, we were roommates, but a little more than roommates, but not.
Was that because of conviction?
I want to say yes, but I'm not. I actually, you know what? Nobody's ever asked me that, and I never really wondered that. I don't know, and maybe so. Maybe so. It's just I was not comfortable in my skin, with I just wasn't comfortable in my skin with it.
At what point did you meet Trina? You told me this is where we're kind of back there now,
Okay.
I think. So you meet her. She's looking for her dad. You help her, and you guys have that conversation. She shares the gospel with. Did she share the gospel?
She didn't share the gospel with me. What she did was, well, I guess she did. She did share the gospel with me. She shared the gospel with me through her behavior and her work and her attitude towards me. That's how she shared the gospel with me, because she showed me Jesus Christ through her. She showed the love of Christ that was in her. She showed him. She showed him to me. That's how I heard the gospel. I didn't hear the gospel from the pulpit. I saw the gospel in her. and that was the difference. That's what I needed, you know. Some people can hear it, and they're convicted and they're changed. I needed to see it.
What was, like, what actions? I know it wasn't just like an instant conversion, or was
No,
it?
it wasn't. No, it wasn't. So there was a lot of going back and forth, and me sitting down at the pier, beating on my steering wheel, just raising Cain at the Lord, fussing at him. Uh, on the base, walking around the USS Cole Monument, just walking in circles, just on conversations with her. Just I don't get it, I don't understand, I mean, there were some angry moments between me and the Lord. And okay, so I told you I was a self-mutilator.
Yeah.
One of the things, and this was just, Trina had a very rough childhood also, not, I mean, it doesn't matter how much, but anyway, she had her journey. And one day I'm in my bedroom and I'm on the phone with her, and this is just the craziest thing. She says to me, and her mother was a narcissist, and she had joined this group support for children with narcissists. And she said, I was in the group today, and and I just told them I used to tear the skin off the bottom of my feet. And I just about had a heart attack, because that was one of the last secrets I had. It was like those 12 words. I had no more shame. I was not alone. And I didn't need to do this alone. And the very next day, I called Genesis Counseling. I started counseling, Christian counseling. I enrolled in Regent University. I started taking biblical and theological studies because I wanted to know everything about the Lord that I could find about him. I'm so hungry to know him and to learn more about him. When we first started talking, my testimony, all that other stuff, that's just all that stuff that happened. That's nothing compared to what's happened since I've come to know him. I look back on all that, and I've said this before, and I know people think I'm crazy when I say it. I'm grateful for the journey I've walked, because it's brought me to the place where I'm at today. I am so grateful. The Lord, the Lord has been so He has shown me so much and healed me in so many ways. It wasn't overnight when I accepted the Lord that everything changed. It was a little by little. The first was one day, I don't know, maybe I don't remember how long, but soon after I accepted Christ as my Savior, I'm reading my Bible one day, and all of a sudden, and I just said it out. I'm not a lesbian. I'm a child of God, and I was like, oh, I was excited. I was like, wow. I was like, okay, that's all right, And then, sometime later, the Lord revealed to me why I had done what I had done. And for me, I was so broken and had such a bad view of what love was and wasn't, and what a relationship between people of opposite sex was supposed to be. But out of my need or my desire to be loved, I perverted what was natural into something unnatural. And the second I realized that, my attraction towards women went away. I mean, the second. I was like, wow. One of my really good friends, and I've told her this before, and before I accepted Christ, before that day, actually, before I accepted Christ as my Savior, if I had a close, intimate relationship with a woman, and I'm talking about friendship, I would always think, where's this going? Where's this heading? But after, and God gave me that revelation about why I had done what I did, it was like, it didn't ever cross my mind. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. It just. So there are some people who still struggle, with their identity. I can't answer for them. I can tell you what the Lord did with me. I could sit here all day long and talk to you about the theology on that, on why, there's so many things. It starts with love. It actually starts with knowing what love is and what it is not. And the world's idea of love is not agape love. They cannot know agape love until they have a relationship with Him. I told you in the beginning, we have God's thumbprint on our heart. He gives us knowledge of Himself. We have that knowledge of Him. And because we are created in His image, we have the ability to love. But the love He created for us to experience has been so damaged and so distorted and so destroyed by what we experience in this world. And that goes back to what I was saying about my parents. The way my parents loved me may not have been good. It may not have been right, but that's what they knew, because the thumbprint God had on their heart had been distorted. The love had been distorted. It had been perverted into something, and they didn't know how to do it. And only God can heal that. Only He can heal that. And, Eros, Philo, and Storge, the other three loves of the Bible, we are capable of those loves. We have the ability to love. God gives us that because that's who He created us. He is the author of love. But it's corrupt, absent agape love. And, I think that's where people just don't get it, They don't get it. I wished, my heart breaks. The prodigal prayer ministry, my dad prayed for me for 35 years. And I just think about all those kids, the families that are out there, and they've got a prodigal. There's no reason for that hurt and that hurt and that loneliness. There's not. And I just was like, oh, I wished they knew that,
So you got saved and you were like after the Lord at that point, but how did your previous partner come to know the Lord?
This is a God story also. I got so many of them. So I had, whenever I came to know the Lord, I bought her a Bible for Christmas, that first Christmas. And she's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's not for me. And I would get tracts from the church and I'd put them in her bedroom. Yeah, okay, That, I'm happy for you, but that's not for me. That's good for you, that's not for me. And I would invite her to, nah, I'm good. Well, one day, the Coffee and Conversation, the very first one that we had here at the church, the women's ministry, I was talking to someone from the women's prayer group, and she said, "Well, why don't you invite her?" And I was like, "She won't come. I always invite her, but she won't ever come." And so I was like, "You know what?" The Lord convicted me. I was like, "Okay." So I called her up. I said, "Hey, we have a function on Friday night at the church with women's ministry. Would you like to come?" She said, "Yeah." I was like, "What?" you know? And so I was like, "Okay, well, I'll come pick you up." So I go to pick her up, and I'm still expecting her to back out all the way up until the time she got in the car and buckled her seatbelt. You know, I'm expecting her to back out, and we get into the church, and I'm introducing her to some of the women from the women's prayer group, and just sitting around, just chit chatting, and I could tell she was getting a little bit uncomfortable. And I said, "Are you ready to go?" And she said, "Yeah, let's go." And so we started walking out the door through lobby A. Man, we start heading that door, and it says, "You don't go nowhere until you get somebody to share the gospel." And I knew that I couldn't share the gospel with her because, she just couldn't hear it from me. So I looked at her and I said, "We can't leave." So I said, "Come on." So I turned around and I went and looked for Julie. That was the lead of our prayer group first. And I couldn't find her. So they said, "She's gone." So I was like, "Okay, I can't leave here." I'm talking to myself and the Holy Spirit. And I found Tanya, and I said, "Tanya, you've got to share the gospel with my friend." And so we sit down at the table, and they start talking. And they clicked right off. Well, the Lord says, "Pam, you need to go to the bathroom." I was like, "Okay." So I get up and I went to the bathroom. I came back. When I came back, they're in prayer bringing her to the Lord. She accepted Jesus Christ as her Lord and Savior that night. There is nothing more exciting than seeing somebody you care about come to know the Lord.
What are you thankful for, seeing that the Lord brought you all the way through this to this point?
I'm thankful He never gave up on me. I'm thankful He never turned His back on me. I'm thankful He pursued me and He met me where I was at. I'm thankful for the people He's put in my life. I'm thankful for Him bringing people into my life who have ministered to me. I'm thankful for this church. I'm thankful for what am I? Everything. The house that I live in was a gift from God. I know that. Everything I have, everything I am, is because of Him. I am 63 years old. It was in 2018 when I came to know the Lord, and I've only just began to live. I want everybody to know that whatever they're going through, whatever they're dealing with, stop listening to that voice in the world that tells you you're alone, that you're unworthy. Don't be ashamed of don't be ashamed, because God will use our mess for His glory, And for Christians, man, I want parents who have a prodigal to know they're not alone and to reach out and talk to others. I want people to know who are broken and feel like they're all alone to know they're not. There's people out here that want to walk beside them. Region's the best place to do it, You've got this church has more grace and has such an open heart to people. There's no reason to walk alone.
What does the Lord fill, like that gap that you said was just, it was void and you were trying to fill it with all these things? Like, explain how the Lord filled it.
You know, for me, I had, you know, the way I grew up, the things I had experienced, the things that I went through, the things that I did to myself, you know, I didn't have a purpose. I didn't have any value, and I definitely didn't feel loved. Yeah. And the Lord's done that. He's shown me that. He's shown me His love for, He's shown me His. Can you know what? Okay, I love reading God's Word. There's sometimes that I can read one story and then I read another story, and this one becomes more important. They're just all crazy. But you look at who else would wash a man's feet that's going to betray you and let you hang on a cross? Who else would do that? The Bible's just beautiful, and it is living, and it is alive. And all you got to do is read it to see that it's alive, and how it applies. And it's definitely not out of date, because there's so much of it you can read into it. And you can see how it, how it applies today.
What would you say to someone who feels that they're too far gone for God to reach?
The woman at the well was a Samaritan, adulteress. She was a sinner. But Jesus went out of His way to meet her. None of us are too far gone for the Lord. He pursues us. He wants a relationship with us, but He's not going to make us do something we don't want to do. He wants us to choose Him. He wants a relationship with Him. He wants us to have a relationship with Him, but He's not going to push it on us. He's there waiting. All you got to do is stop and get yourself out of the way and listen. If you want to know who He is, get into the Word and leave your preconceived ideas of who you think He is. And let Him tell you who He is. You're going to find out that you're ready to walk away from anything and everything to have a relationship with Him.
That was awesome. You feel good about it?
Yeah, I probably rambled a lot.
I don't think you rambled. I think that it's a complex story, and some of that's probably hard for you to relive and talk about.
Not
Do you
really.
want me to stop recording?
No, not really, because I'll tell you why, and it goes back to when I first accepted the Lord as my Savior, and I told my dad and my sisters, I was like, look, I'll be honest with you, I wanted to get on top of a hood of a car and just yell at the top of my lungs, look what the Lord has done. I mean, golly Moses, how can you, I want to tell you what He's done. And my dad, my sisters were like, Pam, you need to be careful, because there's people that aren't going to like it, what you have to say. They're going to be, they're going to be judged. I was like, I don't care. I don't care. That became, it was just like, I don't care. I don't care what anybody has to say. There are people that still look at me sideways sometimes, waiting, because they don't believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. They do not believe that the Lord can change somebody's heart like that. And I'm telling you, He can. There are people who are still living in that lifestyle that think, no, I'm born this way. God created me this way. I'm not. You know what? That's not who God created you to be. For somebody who's in it, I want you to know something. You're seen. We know you need to be seen, and we know you need to be heard. What you feel is real. What you're experiencing is real. Nobody wants to deny you what you're feeling or what you're thinking. But what we want you to know is God has something much, much more for you. When Jesus came, not once did he ever say, live your best life. Not once. He said, come, follow me. Deny yourself, pick up your cross and follow me. Jesus showed his love for us on the cross. He's nailed up on the cross and he's looking down at the soldiers who are throwing dice for his clothing and listening to the people walking past him and mocking him. Hey, if you're the Son of Man, come down from the cross. He had people spitting on him, and at any time he had the chance, but he denied himself for you, for me. That is love. That is what love is. And that's what he did for us. It's not about life here on this earth, living your best life here on earth. It's about having eternity with him. That's what it's about. Hi, my name is Pam, and I'm captivated and changed by Jesus.